Welcome, take a moment to breathe. If you enjoy these quiet stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Story 1. At 2:11 a.m., the fire department received a call that never should have come, because the house had already been empty for 9 years. The voice on the other end was calm. Male. Measured. "I think it's starting again," he said. "Sir, what address are you calling about?" A pause. Then, 148, Briar Hill Road. The dispatcher froze. Everyone in Ashford County knew that address. The last house on Briar Hill. The Whitmore house. The murder house. The line went dead before she could respond. The house that watched. 148, Briar Hill Road sat alone at the edge of town, just past the tree line where the pavement turned to gravel. No neighbors. No street lights. No nearby traffic. Just a two-story Victorian structure with peeling white paint and blackened second-floor windows that had never been repaired. 9 years ago, the Whitmore family was found inside. All 4 of them. Dead. No signs of forced entry. No robbery. No known enemies. The father, Daniel Whitmore, was discovered in his study with a single gunshot wound to the head. The mother, Elaine Whitmore, was found at the kitchen table, hands folded as if waiting for dinner. The children, 12-year-old Hannah and 9-year-old Lucas, were upstairs in their beds. No defensive wounds. No signs of struggle. No suicide note. The coroner ruled it a murder-suicide. Case closed in less than a week. But something never fit. Because Daniel Whitmore had no gunshot residue on his hands, and the weapon found beside him had no fingerprints. The deputy who stayed. Deputy Marcus Vale was the first officer on scene 9 years ago. He was 29 then. Now he was 38. And he still drove past Briar Hill at least once a week. He told himself it was habit. Routine patrol. But the truth was simpler. He never believed the official story. That night, when he stepped into the Whitmore house for the first time, something felt wrong. Not violent wrong. Not chaotic wrong. Quiet wrong. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. He remembered walking into the study and seeing Daniel Whitmore slumped in his chair. The man's eyes were open. Not frozen in fear. Not wide with shock. Just staring. At the wall. The mark. Behind Daniel's desk, carved faintly into the wood paneling, was a symbol. At the time, Marcus assumed it was decorative. Part of the house's old design. But over the years, he couldn't forget it. A circle, with 3 vertical lines through it, and a small slash across the top. He'd seen it once before, but he couldn't remember where. The call that shouldn't exist. At 2:19 a.m., dispatch rerouted the strange call to Marcus's patrol car. Unit 12, we received a 911 call from 148 Briar Hill Road. Marcus felt his chest tighten. That address is vacant. We know. Any sign of entry? Not that we can see on traffic cam. Marcus didn't wait for backup. He turned the cruiser toward Briar Hill immediately. The door was open. When he arrived, the front door of 148 Briar Hill was standing slightly ajar. That alone was impossible. The house had been boarded and locked after the murders. City code enforcement checked it annually. No signs of forced entry were visible. Marcus stepped out of the cruiser slowly. The night air felt thick, heavy, the kind of silence that swallows sound. He drew his flashlight and approached the door. It creaked open with barely a push. And inside, the lights were on. The impossible detail. Not candles. Not flashlights. The house's overhead fixtures, illuminating the hallway exactly as they had 9 years ago. Marcus's breath slowed. The electricity had been cut after the murders. Meters removed. Wiring disconnected. He knew because he'd been there when it happened. He stepped inside. The air smelled clean. Not dusty. Not abandoned. Clean. Like someone had been living there. The study. He moved toward the study first. The door was open. The desk was in place. The bookshelf aligned exactly as before. But the chair. The chair was facing the wall. Not the desk. Marcus stepped around it slowly. The desk surface was clear. No dust. No debris. And on the wood paneling behind where the desk had once been pressed, the symbol, freshly carved, deeper than before, the circle, 3 lines, the slash, and beneath it, one word, return. The voice upstairs. Marcus's radio crackled. Backup units were still 10 minutes out. Then he heard it. A soft sound from upstairs. A footstep. Not a creak. A deliberate shift of weight. Marcus raised his weapon. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. No response. Another step. Slower this time. He moved toward the staircase. Each step upward felt like walking into memory. 9 years ago, he'd climbed these same stairs and found 2 children who would never wake up again. Now, the hallway light was on. Hannah's bedroom door was open. The room that changed. The room wasn't dusty. The bed was made. The curtains were drawn neatly. On the nightstand, a glass of water, half full. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He stepped closer. The water was fresh. Condensation on the outside of the glass. He touched it. Cold. Someone had poured it recently. Very recently. Then, he heard breathing. From the closet. The closet door. The door was slightly cracked. Marcus aimed his flashlight at the narrow opening. "Come out slowly," he said. Silence. Then, a small voice. "Daddy." Marcus's blood froze. The voice was young. Female. 12 years old. Exactly the age Hannah Whitmore had been. His voice trembled despite himself. "Who's in there?" The door creaked open wider on its own. And standing inside was a girl. Long brown hair. Pale skin. Wearing a white nightgown. Her eyes were wide. Confused. And painfully familiar. Because Marcus had seen her before. In photographs. In autopsy reports. In the crime scene photos he'd never managed to delete from his memory. It was Hannah Whitmore. Exactly as she had looked 9 years ago. Unaged. Unchanged. Alive. The words she spoke. She blinked slowly at him. "You're not my dad," she said quietly. Marcus's hands trembled. "Who are you?" he asked hoarsely. She tilted her head slightly. "You let him leave." The words hit harder than any gunshot. "What do you mean?" Marcus whispered. Before she could answer, the lights in the house flickered violently. His radio shrieked with static. The temperature dropped instantly. And when he blinked, the closet was empty. The backup arrives. When other units arrived minutes later, the house was dark again. No electricity. No signs of forced entry. No glass of water. No carved symbol. No open door. Just dust. Thick, undisturbed dust. Marcus stood in Hannah's bedroom doorway in silence. "You okay?" one of the deputies asked. Marcus nodded slowly, but his mind was racing. Because in the dust on the bedroom floor, there was a single set of fresh footprints. Small, bare, leading from the closet to the hallway, and stopping at the top of the stairs, as if someone had been waiting. The truth he buried. Marcus hadn't told anyone something about the original investigation. Something small. Something he convinced himself didn't matter. On the night of the murders, as he stood in the Whitmore study, Daniel Whitmore's eyes weren't just staring at the wall. They were staring at something carved behind the desk. The same symbol. But back then, it wasn't carved into the paneling. It had been scratched faintly into the back of Daniel's hand. Marcus never put it in the report, because he assumed it was self-inflicted. Now, he wasn't so sure. The final image. As Marcus stepped outside that night, he glanced up at the second-floor window, just once, and for a fraction of a second, he saw a figure standing there, watching him. Not a child, not Hannah, a tall man, in shadow, still, waiting. The Whitmore house was never just a murder scene. It was the beginning of something unfinished. And after 9 years of silence, it was asking to return. The last person to see Daniel Whitmore alive wasn't his wife. It wasn't his business partner. It wasn't even someone who knew his name. It was a delivery driver who almost didn't remember him at all. The security footage from 11:43 p.m. showed Daniel opening the front door of his lake house on Briarwood Drive. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He looked cautious. The porch light illuminated half his face. The other half was swallowed by shadow. Standing on the steps was a man wearing a dark hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low. The man held a small box, standard brown cardboard, no visible label from the camera angle. Daniel hesitated. Then he stepped aside and let the man in. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. The footage didn't show what happened inside. There were no interior cameras. Daniel had always said he valued privacy. Ironically, that privacy now left investigators blind. When police canvassed the area, they quickly discovered something strange. No delivery service had a record of a package scheduled for that address that night. Not UPS. Not FedEx. Not Amazon. Not any local courier. The box didn't officially exist. Detective Laura Mendez replayed the footage in the dim glow of the station's media room. She slowed it down frame by frame. The visitor's posture was relaxed. Not aggressive. Not hurried. Daniel didn't seem surprised to see him. That was important. If someone random showed up at your door near midnight, you'd hesitate longer. You'd check through the window. You'd keep the chain on. Daniel did none of those things. He opened the door fully. And he stepped aside, like he'd been expecting him. There was something else. At exactly 11:45 p.m., 2 minutes after the door closed, the porch light flickered once. Then went out. Not blown. Not shattered. Turned off. Manually. That detail lodged itself in Laura's mind like a splinter. Someone inside had flipped the switch. The autopsy results arrived the next morning. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Time of death, approximately midnight. No defensive wounds. No signs of forced restraint. No struggle in the house. He hadn't fought, or hadn't had time to. The coroner estimated he'd been struck from behind. One clean hit. Precise. Controlled. Professional. But then came the detail that shifted the investigation entirely. There were trace fibers embedded in the wound. Dark red wool. Not from Daniel's clothing. Not from anything in the house. It didn't belong. And there was more. Under Daniel's fingernails, microscopic flecks of metallic paint. Deep navy blue. The kind used on industrial-grade vehicles. Trucks. Commercial vans. Heavy equipment. Laura stared at the lab report. This wasn't a random break-in. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was someone who came prepared. And left almost nothing behind. Almost. The lake house itself told a quiet story. Nothing was missing. The safe in Daniel's office remained locked. Cash untouched. Expensive watches in their display case. Whoever killed him didn't come for money. They came for him. Daniel's wife, Elise Whitmore, returned from her sister's house at 2:13 a.m. She found the front door unlocked. Lights off. Her husband lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of dark, drying blood. Her 911 call was frantic, raw, genuine. "I just found him. He's not breathing. Oh God, Daniel, please." The dispatcher later said it didn't sound rehearsed. But Laura had learned long ago, grief had many voices. And guilt sometimes wore the loudest one. Elise claimed she had left at 7:30 p.m. to stay overnight with her sister in Brookhaven. Phone records confirmed she arrived around 8:15 p.m. Security footage from her sister's apartment lobby placed her there at 8:22 p.m. She didn't leave until police called her. Her alibi held. But something about her reaction during questioning unsettled Laura. Elise didn't ask who might have done it. She didn't ask if there were suspects. She asked one question. Did he suffer? That wasn't unusual on its own. But the way she asked it, like she already feared the answer. Meanwhile, Daniel's business partner, Marcus Hale, had a different tone entirely. Shock. Anger. Indignation. This makes no sense, Marcus insisted in the interrogation room. Daniel didn't have enemies. He wasn't that kind of man. But financial records painted a more complicated picture. Daniel and Marcus co-owned Whitmore and Hale Development Group, a real estate firm specializing in waterfront properties, including the Briarwood Lake community. In the last 6 months, the company had quietly acquired 3 adjacent parcels of land near the lake, land that had previously been protected wetland, the kind that required permits, the kind that required influence, the kind that made people angry. Laura dug deeper. Emails between Daniel and Marcus revealed tension. Disagreements over a new development project codenamed Evergreen Expansion. Daniel had written just 3 days before his death. "We need to slow this down. This isn't clean. If this leaks, we're exposed." Marcus had replied, "Relax. It's handled." Handled how? And by whom? Then came the neighbor. Mrs. Darlene Keats, age 67, insomnia sufferer, avid bird watcher. She lived directly across the narrow inlet from Daniel's lake house. At 12:07 a.m., she reported hearing something unusual. Not a scream. Not a gunshot. A splash. A heavy one. Like someone dropped something big into the water, she said. Police searched the shoreline the next morning. Nothing. But divers were scheduled anyway. Because if something had been thrown in, it meant the killer didn't leave empty-handed. Back at the station, Laura requested traffic camera footage from nearby intersections. At 11:39 p.m., a dark navy blue utility van passed the corner of Briarwood and Lakeview Road. At 12:12 a.m., the same van drove away from the neighborhood. The plates were partially obscured, but the company logo was visible for a split second. Green tree silhouette, white lettering, Evergreen Environmental Services. Laura leaned back in her chair. Evergreen. Like the project name. Evergreen Expansion. Coincidence? Or cover? She pulled up corporate records. Evergreen Environmental Services was a subcontractor frequently hired for land surveying and soil testing, including by Whitmore and Hale, owned by a man named Thomas Granger. And Thomas Granger had a criminal record. Assault. Illegal dumping. Bribery charges, dismissed. Laura felt the case shifting. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was connected to something bigger. Something layered. And someone inside that house that night had trusted the man at the door. Because Daniel didn't hesitate long enough for it to be a stranger. The divers found something at 3:42 p.m. Not far from the dock behind Daniel's house. It was wrapped in a weighted tarp, secured with industrial zip ties. Inside was a blooded hammer. Red wool fibers clung to the handle. The same fibers found in Daniel's wound. There were no fingerprints. But there was something else. A faint engraving on the metal shaft. Property of EES. Evergreen Environmental Services. Laura stared at the evidence bag. This was too obvious. Too clean. Almost staged. If someone wanted to frame Evergreen, this was how you'd do it. But if Evergreen really was involved, then Daniel's death wasn't personal. It was business. That evening, Laura sat alone in her office reviewing Daniel's last outgoing call. 11:31 p.m. 8 minutes before the van appeared on traffic cam. The call lasted 47 seconds. The recipient? Thomas Granger, owner of Evergreen Environmental Services. Laura listened to the recorded voicemail Daniel had left. It was calm. Measured. Tom, we need to talk. Tonight. Don't wait. Just come by. No anger. No panic. Just urgency. Daniel had summoned him. Not the other way around. Which meant one thing. The man who knocked on that door wasn't an unexpected visitor. He was invited. And Daniel had known exactly who he was letting inside. But why call someone over that late? Why risk it? Unless whatever they needed to discuss couldn't wait until morning. Unless Daniel had discovered something. Something dangerous. Something worth killing for. Laura looked at the timeline again. 11:31 p.m. Daniel calls Granger. 11:39 p.m. Evergreen van enters neighborhood. 11:43 p.m. Daniel opens door. 11:45 p.m. porch light goes out. Approx. midnight. Daniel dies. 12:07 a.m. A splash heard. 12:12 a.m. van leaves. Clean. Efficient. But not perfect. Because Daniel had sent one more thing before he died. At 11:35 p.m. 4 minutes after the call. A scheduled email. Set to deliver at 12:30 a.m. to one recipient. His wife, Elise. The subject line read, "If anything happens to me." And Laura hadn't opened it yet, because she wanted the whole team in the room when she did. Whatever was inside that email, Daniel had expected danger. He had planned for it, which meant this wasn't a spontaneous fight. It was a meeting that turned fatal, or a confrontation that was always meant to end that way. Laura stared at the unopened file icon on her screen, and for the first time since this case began, she felt something close to dread. Because sometimes the victim doesn't just know their killer. Sometimes they invite them in. And sometimes, they already know they might not walk away alive. The conference room was silent. Detective Laura Mendez stood at the head of the table, her fingers resting lightly on the laptop keyboard. Around her sat the core team, forensics, digital crimes, and Captain Howard near the back wall, arms folded. On the screen glowed a single unopened email. From Daniel Whitmore to Elise Whitmore. Time scheduled, 12:30 a.m. Subject, if anything happens to me. Daniel had died around midnight, which meant this message was written before the meeting. Before the blow. Before the splash in the dark. Laura inhaled slowly. Recording, she asked. Recording, the tech confirmed. She clicked. The email opened with no greeting. No Elise. No soft introduction. Just words that felt heavy even in plain text. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I need you to know I tried to fix it. Laura felt the air change in the room. Marcus thinks we can bury it. Tom thinks we already have. But it's not just paperwork. It's not just permits. The soil samples were altered. The runoff reports were falsified. If the EPA audits Evergreen, it traces back to us. The lake isn't safe, Elise. Someone shifted in their chair. Laura kept reading. The expansion project sits on contaminated ground. Industrial waste from before the wetlands were protected. Tom's company cleaned it on paper. In reality, they covered it. If construction starts, toxins will leach into the water system. Families will get sick. Laura's eyes narrowed. This wasn't about zoning. This was about poisoning an entire community. I confronted Marcus last week. He said the numbers were too big to walk away from. Investors are locked in. Contracts signed. He told me to stop digging. Tonight I'm meeting Tom. I need proof. Real proof. I can't go to authorities without it. If I don't come back from this, it wasn't an accident. The final line felt like a stone dropping into water. Check the storage unit. Locker 417. Key is in the red toolbox in the garage. I love you. D. Silence. Laura slowly closed the laptop. Captain Howard exhaled. So he knew. Yes, Laura said quietly. He knew he was stepping into something dangerous. And he still invited Granger over. Laura nodded, which means he thought he had leverage. An hour later, officers were at Whitmore's storage facility on the outskirts of town. Unit 417. Elise stood nearby, pale but composed. She had insisted on being present. I deserve to know, she had said. Laura didn't argue. The lock clicked open. Inside were 3 plastic bins, neatly labeled. Project Evergreen, Phase 1. Environmental reports. Insurance copies. Laura lifted the lid on the first bin. Documents. Hard copies of soil tests. Internal emails. Financial transfers. And a flash drive taped beneath the lid. She handed it to Digital Crimes. Let's see what he found. Back at the station, the flash drive revealed what Daniel had been desperate to confirm. Video footage. Hidden camera recordings from what appeared to be an industrial site near the wetland border. Date stamped 3 months prior. The footage showed trucks bearing the logo of Evergreen Environmental Services dumping barrels into a shallow trench. The barrels were marked with hazardous waste symbols. No protective lining. No containment. Just dirt pushed over the top. Laura felt her jaw tighten. They hadn't cleaned the land. They had buried the evidence. There were also scanned invoices showing payments routed through shell corporations. One name kept appearing in the paperwork. Whitmore and Hale Development Group. Daniel's own company. Marcus Hale was brought in for questioning again that afternoon. This time, Laura didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a printed still frame from the buried barrel footage across the table. Marcus's face didn't move. Recognize the trucks. No. The logo says Evergreen Environmental Services. I hire subcontractors. I don't micromanage what they do. Laura leaned forward slightly. Daniel thought you did. That earned the smallest flicker in Marcus's eyes. Daniel was nervous, Marcus said carefully. He overreacted. He scheduled an email in case he died. Silence. He thought you'd bury him along with the barrels. Marcus's jaw clenched. You're reaching. Laura slid another page across the table. Bank transfer records. 7-figure sums. Why were payments funneled through North Shore Holdings? That's a holding company. Owned by your brother-in-law. Marcus didn't answer. Meanwhile, a warrant was executed at the headquarters of Evergreen Environmental Services. Thomas Granger wasn't there. His phone went straight to voicemail. His Navy utility van was missing. Laura stood in Granger's empty office. On his desk sat an untouched cup of coffee, still warm. He'd left in a hurry. Then came the call that changed everything. Forensics had finished analyzing the hammer recovered from the lake. The engraving wasn't original. It had been recently etched. Manually. Poorly aligned. Like someone wanted it to look official, but didn't have access to proper company tools. The blood matched Daniel. The fibers matched the wound. But there was something else. On the tarp wrapping the hammer, microscopic traces of sand not native to the lake shoreline. It was industrial-grade sand. The kind used in construction staging areas. Like the one currently being prepared for the Evergreen expansion site. Laura stared at the report. Someone had taken a company vehicle, used a staged weapon, and tried to make it look like Evergreen killed Daniel. But why frame a man already under suspicion? Unless the real killer wanted both Daniel and Granger to fall. At 8:17 p.m., officers located Thomas Granger. He wasn't hiding. He was in the emergency room at St. Matthew's Hospital. Beaten. Severely. Broken ribs. Concussion. Defensive wounds all over his arms. He'd been attacked in a warehouse near the construction site. Laura stood at the foot of his hospital bed as he drifted in and out of consciousness. "You went to Daniel's house," she said quietly. Granger's swollen eyes opened just enough to focus on her. "Yes." "Why?" "He called me." "What happened?" Granger swallowed painfully. "He said he had proof. Said he'd go to the authorities. And I told him we could fix it." "Fix it how?" "Delay permits. Move funds. Clean it properly this time." Laura's voice sharpened. "Did you kill him?" Granger's breath hitched. "No. You were there." "Yes." "What happened?" Granger's gaze drifted to the ceiling. "He wasn't alone." Laura froze. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else in the house." The room seemed to shrink. "You saw someone?" Laura pressed. "I heard them," Granger whispered. "Upstairs. Floorboards creaking." Laura's pulse quickened. "Did Daniel know?" Granger shook his head weakly. "He thought it was just us." "And then?" Granger's breathing grew uneven. He turned his back to grab something from his desk. "We were arguing. Then I heard it." "Heard what?" "A rush of air. Like something swung." Laura's stomach tightened. "And Daniel fell." Granger's voice broke. "I didn't touch him. I swear." "Who was upstairs?" "I don't know." "Did you see anyone leave?" Granger's eyes filled with something like fear. "Yes." "Who?" But before he could answer, the heart monitor began to spike erratically. Nurses rushed in. Laura was pushed back. Granger slipped into unconsciousness before finishing his sentence. Later that night, Laura returned to Daniel's lake house. For the first time, she walked the staircase. Slowly, listening. At the top of the stairs, the hallway carpet showed faint depressions. Almost invisible, like someone had stood there for a while, waiting. In the master bedroom, she noticed something she hadn't before. The closet door was slightly misaligned. She opened it. Inside, behind hanging suits, was a small security camera mounted near the ceiling. Not connected to the main system. Hidden. Laura's breath caught. Daniel had installed a private camera. Perhaps after growing suspicious. Perhaps after feeling watched. She called Digital Crimes immediately. "Pull this," she ordered. If it recorded anything that night. Her mind raced. Daniel called Granger at 11:31. Van arrived at 11:39. But someone else was already inside. Upstairs. Listening. Waiting for the confrontation to begin. Waiting for Daniel to turn his back. And then. Strike. One clean blow. Professional. Calculated. The porch light turning off wasn't Granger. It was the person who'd been hiding. Cleaning up. Framing Evergreen. Silencing Daniel. And nearly killing Granger to ensure he couldn't speak. Back at the station, the footage from the hidden bedroom camera began to load. Timestamp, 11:12 p.m. Nearly 30 minutes before the van arrived. The hallway camera showed Daniel walking upstairs briefly. Checking something. Looking uneasy. Then going back down. At 11:20 p.m., the camera captured a shadow crossing the hallway. Laura leaned closer. The figure moved carefully. Confidently. They knew the house layout. They wore dark clothing, and in their right hand, a red wool glove. The same fibers found in Daniel's wound. The figure paused directly in front of the camera. Just long enough, as if they knew it was there. Then they reached up, and the screen cut to black. Laura stared at the frozen frame. The last clear image before the feed died. The face wasn't visible, but something was. On the wrist. A watch. Distinctive. Silver band. Blue dial. Laura had seen that watch before. Not on Daniel. Not on Granger. On someone else. Someone who had sat calmly across from her, insisting Daniel had no enemies. Marcus Hale. If the footage confirmed it, Daniel hadn't just uncovered corruption. He had uncovered betrayal. And the man who built the company beside him may have been standing upstairs, waiting in the dark. The still frame from the hidden camera glowed on the screen. A shadowed figure. A red wool glove. A silver watch with a blue dial catching the faintest reflection of hallway light. Detective Laura Mendez didn't believe in coincidences. And she had seen that watch before. Marcus Hale wore it the first day she interviewed him. He'd adjusted it absent-mindedly while insisting Daniel had no enemies. Laura remembered the flash of blue against his wrist. Now she was staring at the same flash frozen in pixelated evidence. But suspicion wasn't proof. And she needed proof. Digital crimes worked overnight to enhance the final frame before the feed cut to black. They adjusted contrast, brightness, sharpened edges. The result wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The engraving on the inner clasp of the watch became faintly visible. 2 letters. MH. Laura didn't speak for several seconds. Marcus Hale. He hadn't just been Daniel's partner. He'd been his best man at his wedding. Godfather to Daniel's niece. Co-founder of Whitmore and Hale Development Group. And possibly, his killer. Laura didn't move immediately. She reviewed everything again. Timeline. Phone logs. Email. Storage unit. Hidden camera. The attack on Thomas Granger. If Marcus had been upstairs before Granger arrived, then he had entered the house earlier. But how? Daniel's phone records showed no call to Marcus that night. No message. No meeting scheduled. Which meant one of two things. Marcus had let himself in. Or someone inside the house had let him in. Laura felt a quiet shift in her thinking. Someone inside the house. Elise Whitmore. The grieving widow with a perfect alibi. At least, that's what the footage suggested. She had arrived at her sister's apartment at 8:22 p.m. Stayed there overnight. Police body cams confirmed her presence when officers arrived to inform her. But alibis could be constructed, especially when technology was involved. Laura requested Elise's full phone extraction again. This time focusing not on calls, but on location data, app background pings, Bluetooth connections, Wi-Fi logs, anything. The results came back 2 hours later. Elise's phone had indeed connected to her sister's Wi-Fi at 8:23 p.m. and remained connected all night. But something else appeared in the data. At 10:58 p.m., Elise's phone briefly disconnected, for exactly 4 minutes, then reconnected. At first glance, it meant nothing. Wi-Fi drops happened, but Laura checked cell tower pings. During those 4 minutes, Elise's phone connected to a tower closer to Briarwood Lake. Not Brookhaven. Not her sister's neighborhood. Closer to her own home. Laura's pulse slowed, then sharpened. Her phone hadn't stayed where she claimed it had. It had traveled. Laura pulled traffic cam footage from the Brookhaven parking garage. At 10:51 p.m., a dark sedan exited. License plate matched Elise Whitmore's vehicle. At 11:07 p.m., the same sedan entered Briarwood Lake subdivision. The porch camera footage showed Daniel inside until 11:12 p.m., which meant Elise had returned home, quietly, before Daniel called Granger, before the van arrived, before the murder. The pieces rearranged themselves like a puzzle finally locking into place. Elise knew about the expansion. She knew about the buried waste. She knew about the financial exposure. If Daniel went to authorities, everything collapsed. The company, their wealth, their reputation. And she wasn't just Daniel's wife. She was a silent stakeholder. 40% ownership. Her name tied to investment contracts. If Daniel exposed the corruption, she went down with him. Laura drove back to the lake house. She walked the floor slowly, replaying it in her mind. Elise leaves her sister's house at 10:51 p.m., arrives home around 11:07 p.m., lets herself in quietly, hides upstairs. Daniel doesn't know she's there. At 11:31 p.m., he calls Granger. At 11:39 p.m., Granger arrives. At 11:43 p.m., Daniel lets him in. They argue. Daniel turns his back, and Elise steps out from the hallway. Red wool gloves, hammer in hand. One strike. Clean. Precise. From behind. No hesitation. But there was still a problem. The watch in the footage wasn't Elise's. It was Marcus's. Unless the footage wasn't from that night. Laura felt the edge of a possibility she hadn't considered before. She checked the camera's metadata again. The hidden bedroom camera had been installed 3 weeks earlier. The final frame timestamped 11:20 p.m. But what if the timestamp had been altered? Digital Crimes re-examined the raw data. Within an hour, they found it. The internal clock had been manually adjusted 2 days prior. The 11:20 p.m. footage wasn't from the night of the murder. It was from an earlier date. Marcus had been in that hallway before, but not necessarily that night. Someone had manipulated the timestamp. Someone wanted police to see that watch. Laura leaned back slowly. Elise wasn't framed. Marcus wasn't framed. They were framing each other. She brought Elise in for questioning again. This time, she laid the traffic footage on the table first. Elise stared at it. Her expression didn't shatter. It hardened. "You went home that night," Laura said calmly. Silence. For 4 minutes, your phone connected to a tower near Briarwood. Elise exhaled slowly. "I forgot something." "What?" "My medication." Laura tilted her head slightly. "You drove 25 minutes back home at nearly 11 p.m. for medication, and didn't tell anyone." Elise's jaw tightened. "I didn't think it mattered." Laura slid another image across the table. The still frame of the hallway figure. Red glove. Silver watch. "You recognize this?" Elise didn't answer. "That timestamp was altered," Laura continued. "Someone wanted us to think Marcus was upstairs that night." Elise's eyes flickered for the first time. "You're very careful," Laura said softly. "You made sure your phone went back to your sister's house. You waited until Daniel called Granger. You knew the argument would distract him." "I didn't kill my husband." Laura leaned forward. "Did Marcus?" Silence. Elise's hands trembled slightly. "Did you go back that night to warn Daniel?" Laura pressed. Elise's composure cracked for a split second. "I went back because he wouldn't listen," she whispered. "About what?" "The email." Laura's eyes sharpened. "You knew about the scheduled email." Elise closed her eyes. "He told me he was setting it up." "When?" "Earlier that evening." "Why?" "Because he said if something happened to him, I needed to know the truth." Laura felt the room shift again. Daniel had told her. He had warned her. So why go back? "To stop him," Elise said quietly. "I wanted him to delete it. If he exposed everything, we would lose everything." "So you hid upstairs?" "No." "Then where were you when he called Granger?" Elise's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was in the garage." Laura's mind raced. The red toolbox. The storage unit key. The garage where Daniel kept equipment. "You went to the garage for the key," Laura said slowly. Elise nodded. "I wanted the documents. If I destroyed them, there would be no proof." "And then?" "I heard voices inside. Daniel arguing." She swallowed. "I panicked." Laura held her gaze. "Did you go inside?" Elise shook her head. "I left." "When?" "Before the van arrived." But the timeline didn't support that. Traffic cams showed her car leaving at 11:14 p.m. The van arrived at 11:39 p.m. There was a 25-minute gap. Where had she been? Then the forensic update came in. Fingerprint analysis from the red toolbox in the garage. Fresh prints. Not Daniel's. Not Granger's. Elise's. And Marcus Hale's. Recent. Within 48 hours of the murder. Laura stared at the lab report. Marcus had been in that garage. Recently. Possibly with Elise. Possibly planning. Or possibly arguing. The deeper Laura dug, the clearer one thing became. This wasn't a simple corruption cover-up. It was unraveling into something more intimate. More personal. Financial betrayal was one motive. But emotional betrayal? That could be stronger. She pulled financial records again. Cross-referenced personal transactions. And then she found it. Private transfers between Elise Whitmore and Marcus Hale. Not business accounts. Personal accounts. Dating back 8 months. Small at first. Then larger. Hotels. Luxury gifts. A secluded cabin rental near Briarwood Lake. 3 weeks before the murder. The same week the hidden camera was installed. Laura closed her eyes briefly. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about exposure. It was about a partnership far deeper than business. Daniel had uncovered corruption. But maybe he had uncovered something else too. And maybe the confrontation that night wasn't only about contaminated soil. It was about betrayal in every sense of the word. When Marcus Hale was brought back in, he looked different. Less confident. Less composed. Laura placed the financial transfer records in front of him. He didn't deny them. "You were having an affair," she said. Marcus didn't answer. "You were at the lake house 2 nights before the murder." Silence. "You were in the garage." Marcus's voice came low. Daniel found out. There it was. The fracture point. "He confronted us," Marcus continued. "Threatened to destroy the company. Divorce Elise. Expose everything." Laura watched him carefully. "Did you go back that night?" "No." "Did Elise?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes." Laura's breath slowed. "What was the plan?" "There wasn't one," he snapped. "We just wanted to talk to him. Calm him down." "And the hammer?" Marcus's eyes flicked up sharply. "What hammer?" "The one pulled from the lake. The one wrapped in construction tarp. The one meant to frame Evergreen." Marcus's confusion looked real. Which meant one of them was lying. Oh, there was someone else entirely in this equation. Because Thomas Granger had said he heard someone upstairs. Not in the garage. Upstairs. Waiting. And if it wasn't Marcus, and it wasn't Elise, then someone else had been inside that house before the van arrived. Someone who knew about the email, the documents, the corruption, the affair. Someone close enough to know everything, and patient enough to wait in the dark. Late that night, as Laura reviewed the case file alone, a new notification appeared in her inbox. Unmarked sender. No name. Just a subject line. "You're looking at the wrong 2 people." Attached was a single photograph, taken from a distance. Daniel Whitmore, standing on the dock behind his house, arguing with someone. The photo was grainy, but the face was clear. Not Marcus. Not Elise. Thomas Granger. And standing beside Granger, a third man. One Laura hadn't seen before. Wearing a dark navy jacket, with a green tree logo stitched over the chest. Evergreen Environmental Services. But not Granger. Someone else. Laura stared at the image. Because sometimes corruption runs deeper than partners. Deeper than marriages. And sometimes, the man upstairs isn't the husband, or the lover, but the one nobody thought to question. The photograph didn't leave Laura's mind. Daniel on the dock, Thomas Granger facing him, and beside Granger, the third man. Dark navy jacket, green tree logo, Evergreen Environmental Services. But not the owner, not Thomas Granger. Someone lower in rank. Someone who could move unnoticed. Someone who wouldn't show up in corporate filings or financial transfers. Someone who didn't need 7-figure bribes. Just orders. Laura enhanced the image. Zoomed in on the man's face. Mid-30s. Close-cropped hair. Thick build. A faint scar along the jawline. She ran the image through DMV records cross-referenced with Evergreen employees. 3 possible matches. One stood out. Caleb Turner. Site operations supervisor. Former Army engineer. Dishonorably discharged after an altercation that left another soldier hospitalized. History of bar fights. Assault charges, plea bargains. A man comfortable with force. Laura leaned back. If Granger handled the paperwork, Turner handled the ground, the trucks, the barrels, the cover-ups, and possibly the cleanup. She brought Granger back in for questioning once he was stable enough to sit upright. He looked pale, ribs wrapped, eyes shadowed. Laura placed the photograph in front of him. Granger's face went tight. "You know him," she said. Granger exhaled slowly. "Caleb." Full name. Caleb Turner. What does he do for you? He supervises field operations. Was he at the lake house that night? Granger hesitated. Laura didn't blink. Yes, he finally admitted. The room went still. You said you heard someone upstairs, Laura said carefully. Granger swallowed. I didn't know who it was. But now you do. I saw him earlier that day. He was angry. Said Daniel was going to ruin everything. What did you tell him? To stay out of it. And did he? Granger didn't answer. Laura had offices at Turner's apartment within the hour. He wasn't there. His phone was off. His company-issued truck missing. But inside the apartment, they found something. In the laundry hamper, a single red wool glove, matching the fibers from Daniel's wound. Laura stood in the small apartment kitchen, staring at the evidence bag. The glove was worn at the knuckles. A faint dark stain near the palm. Blood. Preliminary tests suggested it matched Daniel's type. Not confirmation yet, but close. Very close. They found Turner 2 counties over, at a roadside motel. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just stared at the officers like he'd been expecting them. During interrogation, he was calm. Too calm. You were at Daniel Whitmore's house the night he died, Laura began. No, Turner said flatly. We found your glove. I own gloves. You were seen arguing with him days before. Lots of people argue. Laura leaned forward. Thomas Granger says you were angry. Said Daniel was going to ruin everything. Turner's jaw flexed. He was. So you killed him? No. You hid upstairs. No. You struck him from behind. No. Every answer steady. Measured. Almost rehearsed. Laura shifted tactics. You were in the army, she said casually. Turner's eyes flickered slightly. Engineering unit. Yes. You know how to strike someone efficiently. Silence. You know how to bury things. His breathing slowed. You know how to make it look like someone else did it. Turner's gaze hardened. I didn't kill him. Laura studied him. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't defensive. He was resolved, as if protecting something, or someone. Forensics delivered the final blow that evening. The blood on the glove, not Daniel's. It belonged to Thomas Granger. Turner had attacked his own boss. Laura felt the ground shift again. Turner hadn't killed Daniel, but he had beaten Granger. Why? To silence him, or to punish him. She returned to Granger's hospital room. You lied to me, she said quietly. Granger looked exhausted. You said you didn't know who was upstairs. I didn't, he insisted weakly. Caleb attacked you after the murder. Granger closed his eyes. He thought I'd talk. So you know more than you're saying. Silence. Laura stepped closer. Did Caleb kill Daniel? Granger's lips trembled. No. Then who did? Granger's voice barely rose above a whisper. He did. Who? Granger's eyes filled with something that looked like fear, not guilt. Marcus. Laura didn't react. She let the word settle. You're sure? I saw him. When? After Daniel fell. Laura's heart pounded once. Hard. Explain. Granger swallowed painfully. I heard the strike. Daniel went down. I turned around. And Marcus was there. In the room. Yes. With the hammer. No. Then what? He was holding something. A folder. Documents. The storage unit documents. He looked at me, Granger continued, and said, this ends tonight. Laura's pulse quickened. Why didn't you say this before? Because Caleb was there too, Granger whispered. And if I talked, I wasn't walking out of that house. The room felt smaller. So Caleb didn't kill Daniel, Laura said slowly. No. But he knew. Yes. And he attacked you later because he thought you'd expose Marcus. Granger nodded weakly. Laura pieced it together carefully. Elise returns home. Marcus possibly already inside, or arriving shortly after. Turner lurking nearby, maybe called as backup. Daniel confronts Granger. Argument escalates. Daniel turns his back. And Marcus, not the hired muscle, not the subcontractor, but the business partner, the friend, the brother in everything but blood. Marcus strikes. One clean blow. From behind. Professional. No. Personal. But something still didn't fit. The hammer had been wrapped in construction tarp and dumped. Turner could have done that. But why frame his own company? Unless Marcus instructed him. Or unless Marcus wanted everyone blaming Evergreen. Laura revisited the financials. There was something she hadn't fully explored. Life insurance. Daniel Whitmore had a policy worth $8 million. Primary beneficiary, Elise Whitmore. Secondary beneficiary if Elise declined, Whitmore and Hale Development Group. Controlled by Marcus Hale. Laura exhaled slowly. If Elise was implicated in the murder, she would forfeit the payout, and the company would collect, meaning Marcus would gain full control of everything. She brought Marcus in again, this time without subtlety. You killed him, she said flatly. Marcus didn't flinch. That's a serious accusation. You were there. Granger saw you. Marcus smiled faintly. Granger was concussed. You had motive, financial and personal. You think I'd risk everything? I think you already had. Marcus leaned back. You're wrong. Laura studied him carefully. You loved her, she said quietly. That made him look up. Elise. Silence. You loved her more than the company. More than Daniel. His jaw tightened. He was going to ruin her, Marcus said finally. Divorce. Public scandal. Prison time. So you saved her. I didn't kill him. But you were there. Marcus hesitated. Yes. Laura felt the last piece sliding into place. What happened? Marcus stared at the table for a long moment. Then he spoke. I went to talk him down. He was angry. Talking about the email. About exposing everything. And Elise called me earlier. She was scared. Laura's chest tightened. Elise was there. Yes. The air shifted. Where? In the house. Laura's mind raced. She told you to come. Yes. And when you arrived, she was upstairs. The hallway. The hidden camera. The altered timestamp. Daniel and Granger were arguing, Marcus continued. Daniel turned around. And then he stopped. And then Laura pressed. Marcus closed his eyes. Elise came down the stairs. Laura's pulse roared in her ears. With the hammer, Marcus whispered. Silence swallowed the room. You're lying, Laura said carefully. I'm not. She said she left. She didn't. You're blaming her to save yourself. Marcus shook his head slowly. She hit him. Laura felt the entire case pivot on a single word. She. Yes. And you did nothing. Marcus's voice cracked for the first time. It happened so fast. Then why dump the weapon? Why stage it? Marcus looked at her with hollow eyes. Because she was shaking. Because she dropped it. Because Granger was screaming. Because Caleb was outside. Because everything was falling apart. His breathing grew uneven. I told Caleb to handle it. To frame Evergreen. To make it look like Granger lost control. Laura felt the truth settling in layers. Elise returned home. Marcus arrived to help. Granger came to negotiate. Daniel threatened exposure. Elise, cornered, desperate, struck. Marcus covered it up. Caleb cleaned the scene. Granger beaten later to ensure silence. A conspiracy built not just on corruption, but on love twisted into fear. Laura stood slowly. If this is true, she said quietly, she'll confess. Marcus didn't look confident. She won't, he whispered. Laura met his eyes. We'll see. Elise Whitmore sat alone in the interrogation room. Hands folded, eyes distant. Laura entered quietly. She placed one item on the table, the red wool glove, and said only one sentence. Marcus told us everything. Elise didn't react. Not at first. Then, her composure cracked. Just slightly. And Laura knew. They were finally at the truth. But sometimes, the truth isn't about who struck the blow. It's about who believed they had no other choice. Elise Whitmore stared at the red wool glove for a long time. She didn't touch it. Didn't look at Laura. Just stared. The interrogation room felt smaller than before. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, filling the silence between them. Marcus told us everything, Laura repeated calmly. Still nothing. Then Elise exhaled. It wasn't a sob. It wasn't panic. It was exhaustion. What did he say? She asked quietly. Laura didn't blink. That you came down the stairs with the hammer. Elise's jaw tightened. That you hit Daniel. A long pause. And that he helped you cover it up. The silence stretched until it felt like it might snap. Then Elise spoke. He shouldn't have told you that. Laura watched her carefully. No outrage. No denial. Just disappointment. That's not a no, Laura said softly. Elise's fingers curled slightly against the metal table. I didn't mean to kill him. There it was. Not I didn't do it. I didn't mean to. Laura kept her voice steady. Tell me what happened. Elise leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment as if replaying it. I went back to the house because he wouldn't listen, she said. Daniel had already scheduled the email. He showed it to me before I left for my sisters. He told you? Yes. He said he had to protect himself. Protect us. Her lips trembled faintly. But exposing everything would have destroyed us. Financially? Laura asked. Financially. Socially. Legally. Elise's voice hardened. Do you know what a federal environmental investigation would have done? Prison. Asset seizures. Public scandal. So you went back to stop him. I wanted him to delete it. That's all. Laura let her continue. I didn't plan anything, Elise said. I grabbed the first thing I saw in the garage when I couldn't find him downstairs. The hammer. Yes. Why pick up a hammer if you just wanted to talk? Elise closed her eyes. Because I was angry. The word hung there. Angry about the corruption. Laura asked. Angry about everything, Elise whispered. The project. The lies. The affair being exposed. The way he looked at me like I was weak. Laura's eyes sharpened slightly. He knew about the affair. Yes. With Marcus. Yes. And he threatened divorce. Yes. There it was again, layers of motive folding over each other. Where were you when Granger arrived? Laura asked. Upstairs, Elise admitted. I heard Daniel arguing with him. And Marcus? I called him, Elise said quietly. After I got there. Laura felt the confirmation settle. So he knew you were in the house? Yes. When did he arrive? Right before the argument got loud. Laura pictured it clearly now. Daniel downstairs. Granger in the kitchen. Elise upstairs in the hallway. Marcus slipping in quietly, meeting her on the landing. A silent understanding passing between them. What happened next? Laura asked. Elise swallowed. Daniel said he was done protecting everyone. Said he'd send the email and call the authorities in the morning. And I panicked. Her breathing grew uneven. He turned around to grab the folder from the counter. He wasn't even looking at me. Laura's voice was barely above a whisper. And you stepped forward. Yes. You swung. Elise nodded once. I didn't think about it. I just wanted him to stop talking. Just to stop. The room felt impossibly quiet. He fell immediately. Elise continued. There wasn't a scream. There wasn't a fight. Just silence. Tears finally slid down her face. I didn't know one hit could do that. Laura had heard that sentence before in other cases. It never sounded less tragic. What did Marcus do? Laura asked gently. He stared at me like I was a stranger, Elise said. Then he checked Daniel's pulse. And? He said he was gone. A long silence. Granger was shouting, Elise added. Saying we were insane. That this wasn't the plan. There wasn't a plan, Laura corrected. Elise nodded weakly. There wasn't. Who staged the scene? Laura asked. Marcus, Elise said immediately. He told Caleb to come inside. Caleb Turner. Yes. He was already nearby. Yes. Marcus had asked him to wait outside in case things got out of hand. Laura felt the final piece lock in. Back up. Muscle. Not for murder, but for intimidation. Caleb wrapped the hammer, Elise continued. Marcus told him to dump it in the lake and make it look like Granger lost control. And Granger? Marcus said we couldn't trust him. Caleb followed him later. Beat him. Warned him to keep quiet. Laura exhaled slowly. Everything aligned. The glove. The tarp. The staged engraving on the hammer. The attack at the warehouse. It was never about framing Evergreen entirely. It was about creating just enough confusion to muddy the water. Why alter the camera timestamp? Laura asked. Elise's lips trembled again. That was me. You? Yes. I remembered the hidden camera. Daniel had installed it after he suspected Marcus and me. So you accessed it? Yes. I went back the next morning before calling police. I changed the time to make it look like Marcus was upstairs earlier. To protect yourself. To protect us, Elise corrected faintly. Laura tilted her head. From what? From losing everything. The weight of it settled heavily between them. This wasn't a professional hit. It wasn't a carefully plotted murder months in the making. It was fear, greed, desperation, love twisted into something unrecognizable. Did you love him? Laura asked quietly. Elise blinked. Daniel? Yes. A long pause. Yes, Elise whispered. I did. And Marcus? Elise closed her eyes. Yes. Laura nodded slowly. And now? Elise's voice broke completely. Now it doesn't matter. When Marcus was informed that Elise had confessed, he didn't react the way Laura expected. He didn't argue, didn't rage. He just sat back in the interrogation chair and closed his eyes. She shouldn't have taken it all, he murmured. She didn't, Laura replied. You're both being charged. Accessory after the fact. Conspiracy. Evidence tampering. Obstruction. And for Elise, second-degree murder. Caleb Turner was charged with assault and obstruction. Thomas Granger, in exchange for full cooperation, would face environmental crime charges, but not homicide. The web unraveled exactly as it had been spun. Messy. Human. Tragic. 2 weeks later, Laura stood once more at Briarwood Lake. The water was calm. Deceptively peaceful. The Evergreen expansion project had been halted indefinitely pending federal investigation. Environmental agencies were already testing the soil. Barrels were being exhumed. Secrets unearthed. Literally. Daniel Whitmore had wanted the truth exposed. In the end, it was. Just not the way he imagined. As Laura turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A message from Digital Crimes. They had recovered something new from Daniel's laptop. A draft email. Unsaved. Written hours before his death. She opened it. It was addressed to Elise. But never scheduled. Never sent. I know about you and Marcus. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired. We can fix this. All of it. If we're honest. Laura stared at the words. Daniel hadn't been planning revenge. He had been planning forgiveness. And that realization felt heavier than anything else. Because sometimes, the tragedy isn't just that someone dies. It's that the moment before they did, they were ready to make things right. Elise Whitmore would spend the rest of her life knowing that. Marcus Hale would live with it too. And Caleb Turner, he would always be the man who followed orders too far. As for Thomas Granger, he would testify, and watch the company he helped corrupt collapse in court. Laura looked out across the lake one final time. Still, quiet, as if none of it had ever happened. But beneath the surface, barrels of poison waited, just like the secrets that killed a man. 6 months later, Briarwood Lake looked nothing like it had the night Daniel Whitmore died. Yellow environmental hazard signs lined sections of the shoreline. Federal trucks sat parked near excavation sites. Reporters stood behind temporary barricades, rehearsing stand-ups in front of cameras. The case had grown beyond a local homicide. It was now a corporate scandal, an environmental crime investigation, and a courtroom spectacle. At the center of it all, Elise Whitmore, Marcus Hale, and the memory of the man who once trusted them both. The trial began in early spring. The courtroom was packed. Investors, residents from the lake community, media outlets, and federal observers monitoring the environmental case running parallel to the homicide. Elise entered first. No jewelry, no makeup, hair pulled back simply. She did not look like a calculating mastermind. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. Marcus followed, suit pressed, face composed, but his confidence from earlier interrogations was gone. They no longer sat beside each other. No shared glances, no silent reassurance. Whatever bond they had fractured the moment the confessions began. Detective Laura Mendez sat 3 rows back, subpoenaed as a key witness. She had testified in homicide trials before, but this one felt different, not because of the publicity, but because of how preventable it all seemed. The prosecution's narrative was clear. Daniel Whitmore discovered criminal environmental misconduct connected to the Evergreen expansion project. He prepared to expose it. Elise, fearing financial ruin and personal scandal, returned home that night. Marcus joined her. During a heated confrontation, Elise struck Daniel with a hammer. Marcus conspired to cover it up. Caleb Turner disposed of the weapon and assaulted Thomas Granger to ensure silence. It was clean, logical, backed by digital records, forensic analysis, and confessions. But defense attorneys are paid to introduce doubt, and Marcus's attorney did exactly that. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense began, pacing slowly before the jury. This is not a murder conspiracy. This is a tragic accident followed by panic. He emphasized Daniel's volatile emotional state that evening, highlighted heated emails, raised the possibility of self-defense. You heard testimony that Daniel was furious, that he confronted multiple people about betrayal, both financial and personal. The implication hung there. Could he have turned violent first? Could Elise have swung in fear? There were no defensive wounds on Daniel, but the defense argued the blow was reflexive, unplanned, a split-second reaction. Elise took the stand on the 4th day. The courtroom held its breath. She didn't deny hitting Daniel. I struck him, she said plainly, but I never meant for him to die. Her voice trembled only once, when asked about the unsent draft email recovered from Daniel's laptop. The one where he wrote, "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired. We can fix this." Elise broke down. "He never said that to me," she whispered. "He never gave me the chance to hear it." The jury watched closely. Some sympathetic, some not. Marcus's testimony was colder, measured. He admitted to helping stage the scene. "To protect Elise," he said. "Why?" the prosecutor pressed. "Because I loved her." "And Daniel?" Marcus paused. "I loved him too. He was my friend." The prosecutor didn't soften. Friends don't bury friends in lies. Marcus didn't respond. Thomas Granger testified next. He described the argument in the kitchen. The sound of the hammer strike. Marcus standing frozen. Elise trembling. He admitted his own role in falsifying environmental reports. Admitted to burying hazardous waste through Evergreen Environmental Services. The courtroom murmured at that. The homicide trial had become inseparable from the environmental disaster. Residents of Briarwood watched from the gallery, some with visible anger. The lake had been their pride. Now it was contaminated. Children had swum there. Families had fished there. And it had nearly been turned into a poisoned construction site. Caleb Turner's testimony was blunt. "I followed orders," he said. "Whose?" the prosecutor asked. "Marcus Hale's." "Did Elise instruct you to dump the hammer?" "No." "Did she instruct you to assault Mr. Granger?" "No." His answers shifted more liability toward Marcus. Marcus's defense objected repeatedly, but the damage lingered. Detective Laura Mendez took the stand near the end of the prosecution's case. She walked the jury through the timeline. 10:51 p.m., Elise leaves her sister's apartment. 11:07 p.m., Elise arrives home. 11:31 p.m., Daniel calls Granger. 11:39 p.m., Granger's van enters neighborhood. Shortly after, Marcus arrives. Moments later, Daniel is struck. She explained the altered camera timestamp, the staged engraving on the hammer, the insurance policy naming the company as secondary beneficiary, the financial transfers, the affair, each layer building not just a motive, but a collapse of trust. When the prosecutor asked her final question, the courtroom was silent. "Detective, in your professional opinion, was this an accident?" Laura chose her words carefully. It was not premeditated in the traditional sense, but it was not self-defense. It was a deliberate strike during a moment of emotional escalation. And the cover-up? Intentional. No hesitation. No ambiguity. Closing arguments lasted nearly 3 hours. The prosecution focused on accountability. Fear does not excuse violence. Panic does not justify deception. And love does not erase responsibility. The defense focused on tragedy. This is not a monster sitting at that table. It is a woman who made one catastrophic mistake. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days that felt longer than the entire investigation. When they returned, Elise held her breath visibly. Marcus stared straight ahead. The verdict: Elise Whitmore, guilty of second-degree murder. Marcus Hale, guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory after the fact. Caleb Turner, guilty of assault and obstruction. Thomas Granger would face federal environmental charges separately. There was no applause, no outburst, just the heavy finality of consequence. Sentencing came weeks later. Elise received 25 years. Marcus received 15. Caleb Turner received 8. Granger's sentencing would depend on federal cooperation. As Elise was led away, she turned once toward the gallery. Not toward Marcus, not toward the reporters, but toward the empty space where Daniel's family might have been. There was no anger on her face, only something quieter. Regret. Outside the courthouse, Laura stood with Captain Howard. "Do you ever get used to it?" he asked. "No," she replied. "Good," he said, "because if it ever felt routine, it would mean something human had been lost in the process." Months later, Briarwood Lake began its environmental rehabilitation. Barrels were removed, soil treated, water tested continuously. The Evergreen expansion project was permanently cancelled. Whitmore and Hale Development Group dissolved. Investors sued. Assets liquidated. The empire Daniel helped build vanished piece by piece. But the real tragedy wasn't corporate collapse. It wasn't prison sentences. It wasn't financial ruin. It was a single moment, a single swing, a single choice made in anger, and the knowledge that, hours before he died, Daniel had written words of forgiveness. Words that might have changed everything, if only they had been heard. Detective Laura Mendez closed the case file officially 1 year after the murder. Cause: blunt force trauma. Motive: fear, greed, betrayal. Contributing factors: corruption and concealment. But the file didn't capture the human cost. It never could. Because beneath every legal conclusion, there is a family altered forever. A lake that will never feel the same. And a truth that surfaced too late. As Laura locked the cabinet drawer and turned off the office lights, she thought about something Daniel had written. The lake isn't safe. He had meant the water. But he could just as easily have meant something else. Trust. The storm rolled in just after dusk. By the time Sheriff Daniel Mercer's convoy reached the winding road that led up to Black Ridge, rain hammered against the windshield so hard it sounded like gravel. Lightning cracked open the sky in violent white fractures, illuminating the dark forest in brief, skeletal flashes. Beside him, Detective Alina Cruz studied the call log on her tablet for the 100th time. The final outgoing call from Caleb Doyle's phone had lasted exactly 19 seconds. It had connected to a number registered to a prepaid device, one purchased in cash 3 weeks earlier at a convenience store in the next county. The same week Thomas Hale's fingerprints had appeared on that threatening letter sent to Mara Ellison. And the same week that Hale's bank account had shown a large cash withdrawal. Too many coincidences. Too many threads leading to the same place. Black Ridge. The abandoned fire lookout perched high above the town like a forgotten sentinel. It hadn't been operational in over a decade. After budget cuts shut down the station, the structure was left to rot. Locals avoided it. Teenagers dared each other to climb it at night. Hunters swore they heard voices in the trees. But Caleb Doyle had been there. And tonight, so was Thomas Hale. They had tracked Hale's pickup truck using traffic cameras until it vanished at the old forestry road leading up the ridge. Tire impressions in the mud confirmed it. "He's up there," Mercer muttered. Alina nodded. "And if he knows we're coming, he's not planning to surrender." The convoy stopped where the road narrowed into a rutted path barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Deputies stepped out into the rain, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through sheets of water. Mercer raised his voice over the storm. "Spread out. Watch the tree line. No one moves alone." They began the climb. Mud sucked at their boots. Wind tore through branches overhead, sending leaves spiraling through the air like frantic birds. Halfway up the ridge, Alina's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Silence. Only wind. And then a voice. Calm. Measured. Detective Cruz. Thomas Hale. Alina stopped walking. Sheriff Mercer noticed immediately. "What is it?" She held up a hand. "Hale," she said into the phone. "Where is he?" A faint laugh drifted through the static. "You're closer than you think." Lightning flashed again, and for a split second Alina saw it. The silhouette of the fire lookout tower above them. A dark shape against a fractured sky. "He's alive," Hale continued. "For now." Alina forced her breathing to slow. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something before this ends." The rain intensified, drenching them within seconds. "You think this is about money," Hale said. "About jealousy. About some petty feud between neighbors." Mercer signaled deputies to continue moving, to circle the ridge quietly. "You've been building your little narrative," Hale went on. "But you're wrong." "Then tell me," Alina replied. A pause. Then, "It was about balance." The line crackled. Caleb Doyle thought he could expose everything. The council's secrets, the land deals, the payoffs. He didn't know how deep it went. Alina's pulse spiked. "What payoffs?" But Hale ignored the question. "You don't get it yet, but you will." A thud sounded through the receiver, like something heavy being dropped. Alina's voice sharpened. "Hale, don't do anything stupid." "Stupid," he echoed softly. "You still think I'm the only one involved." And then the line went dead. They reached the clearing moments later. The fire lookout stood at the edge of the cliff, its wooden frame weathered and skeletal. Windows were shattered. The narrow staircase spiraled up the outside like a fragile spine. Hale's pickup sat nearby. Empty. "Positions," Mercer ordered. 2 deputies flanked the base of the tower. Alina and Mercer approached the stairs slowly, guns raised. The wood creaked under their weight as they climbed. Wind howled around the structure, making it sway just enough to feel unstable. Halfway up, a voice drifted down. "Don't take another step." They froze. Hale stood at the top platform. Rain plastered his gray hair to his forehead. His glasses were gone. His eyes looked almost luminous in the lightning flashes. And beside him, Caleb Doyle, bound, bruised, alive. Relief hit Alina like a punch. "Hale," Mercer called out. "Let him go." Hale shook his head slowly. "You still don't understand." He stepped closer to the edge of the platform, one hand gripping Caleb's shoulder. "You think I killed Mara, listen." "You did," Alina said firmly. A flicker crossed his face. "Not alone." The wind roared louder, rattling the tower. Caleb groaned faintly, struggling against the ropes. "Hale," Alina tried again, keeping her voice steady. "Whatever you think you're protecting, this isn't the way." Hale's expression hardened. She was going to expose them. Caleb too. Expose who? But Hale's gaze drifted past them, down the hill. Alina followed his line of sight. Headlights. More vehicles approaching the ridge road. Not sheriff's units. Black SUVs. Unmarked. Mercer swore under his breath. "What the hell is this?" Hale's lips curled faintly. "You finally got their attention." Alina's mind raced. Town council. Land deals. Payoffs. Mara Ellison had been digging into zoning permits before she died. Caleb Doyle had been researching something similar. The Ellison property. It had been rezoned just months before her death. For commercial development. And the buyer? A shell corporation with no clear ownership. The black SUVs stopped at the base of the clearing. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out. Not local law enforcement. Not state police. Something else. Mercer's voice went low. "Everyone hold your positions." Hale laughed softly above them. "You see now?" One of the suited men called up from below. "Thomas, this doesn't need to go further." Hale's grip on Caleb tightened. "You said she'd be safe," Hale shouted back. "You promised." The wind swallowed part of his words, but Alina heard enough. She felt the truth click into place. Hale hadn't killed Mara out of greed. He'd killed her to stop her from exposing something bigger. Something that powerful people wanted buried. What did they threaten? Alina demanded. Hale's eyes met hers. "My daughter." The words were almost lost in the storm. "They told me if I didn't handle it, if I didn't make sure the files disappeared, she'd have an accident." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You should have come to us." Hale's laugh turned hollow. "Come to you?" You think they don't own half this town? The suited man below stepped forward. Thomas, release the boy. We can still fix this. Fix this. The phrase echoed ominously. Alina made a decision. She holstered her weapon slowly. Hale, she said, listen to me. If you let Caleb go, we can protect your daughter. We can expose them. You can't, Hale whispered. The tower shuddered under a powerful gust. One of the deputies below shouted, They are moving. The suited men began spreading out, positioning themselves around the clearing. Not aiming guns, but prepared. For what? Another lightning flash. And in that instant, Alina saw it. A thin cable attached to the underside of the platform, running down toward the truck. Explosives. Hale noticed her glance. His expression shifted, not triumph, not madness. Resignation. I never planned to walk away, he said quietly. Alina's heart slammed against her ribs. Hale, don't. But he cut her off. They don't get to bury this again. He shoved Caleb toward the stairs. Mercer lunged forward, grabbing the injured journalist before he could fall. Go! Hale shouted. Alina started down with Mercer and Caleb, heart racing. Hale, come with us. He shook his head. From below, one of the suited men shouted something into a radio. The wind tore the words away. Alina and Mercer reached the base of the tower just as a deafening crack split the air. Not thunder. Gunfire. A single shot. Hale jerked backward. For a second, he remained standing at the edge of the platform. Then he collapsed. The explosion came half a heartbeat later. The top of the tower erupted in flame and splintering wood. The blast wave knocked everyone to the ground. Heat and debris rained down as the upper structure crumpled inward. Screams echoed through the clearing. When the smoke began to clear, the suited men were retreating toward their vehicles. Mercer struggled to his feet, shouting orders. Deputies scrambled to pursue, but the SUVs were already speeding down the ridge road, tires spitting mud. Alina knelt beside Caleb, checking his pulse. Alive, barely conscious. She looked back at the ruins of the tower. Thomas Hale was gone, but so was any physical evidence of what he had been about to reveal. Rain continued to fall, hissing against smoldering wood. Mercer's voice came through the chaos. Cruz, you okay? She nodded slowly, but inside, she felt something shift. This wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was a cover-up, and the people responsible had just shown themselves. As paramedics loaded Caleb into an ambulance at the base of the ridge, he grabbed Alina's wrist weakly. They have the files, he whispered. What files? In the cabin, hidden drive, under the floorboards. His eyes rolled back as exhaustion overtook him. Alina stood there in the rain, watching the smoke curl into the storm-dark sky. Mara Ellison had died trying to expose something. Thomas Hale had killed to protect his daughter, and then sacrificed himself to stop a second burial of the truth. And somewhere in that town, a hidden drive waited, full of secrets. Sheriff Mercer stepped beside her. This just got bigger. Alina nodded. Much bigger. Lightning illuminated the ridge one final time. And in that flash, she realized something chilling. The suited men hadn't looked surprised. They'd looked prepared, as if they had known Hale might talk, as if they'd been watching from the beginning. Chapter 8 wasn't the end of the hunt. It was the moment the hunt turned around. Now, they were the targets. The rain had stopped by morning, but Blackridge still felt like it was holding its breath. Smoke from the ruined lookout tower drifted faintly above the ridge, a black scar against an otherwise clear sky. News vans were already gathering at the town limits. Word traveled fast in small places, especially when an explosion lit up the night. Sheriff Daniel Mercer stood in his office, staring at the preliminary incident report. Cause of explosion, he asked. Improvised device, one of the deputies replied. Triggered remotely or manually. We're still sorting through debris. Mercer nodded slowly. He didn't need the details. He'd seen enough the night before to know what had happened. Thomas Hale hadn't meant to kill Caleb Doyle. He had meant to expose something, and someone had made sure he didn't get the chance. Across the room, Detective Alina Cruz stared at a photograph of the burnt tower. Her mind wasn't on the explosion anymore. It was on Caleb's last words. Hidden drive. Under the floorboards. Hale's cabin, she said quietly. Mercer looked up. We get a warrant. We won't have time. Mercer understood immediately. If men in unmarked SUVs were involved, and if they had already executed Hale to silence him, then they would not wait for legal formalities. They would erase everything. Let's move, Mercer said. Thomas Hale's cabin sat on the outskirts of Black Ridge, nestled deep among pines at the end of a dirt road. It looked deceptively peaceful in daylight. A porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. Wind chimes clinked softly. Nothing about it suggested conspiracy or murder, but Alina felt a weight in her chest as they approached. 2 patrol cars blocked the entrance. Deputies stood guard. No signs of entry since last night, one deputy reported. But we did notice tire tracks at the edge of the property. Fresh. How fresh? Mercer asked. Within the last few hours. Alina's jaw tightened. They're already looking. They entered the cabin carefully. Inside, the space was neat. Too neat. Books lined the walls, local history, environmental studies, property law. A framed photo sat on the mantel. Hale and a teenage girl. His daughter. Alina felt a flicker of anger. Whatever Hale had done, he had done it out of fear. Someone had weaponized that fear. Floorboards, Mercer said. They moved to the living room. The wooden planks creaked under their weight. Caleb had been specific. Under the floorboards. Alina crouched, running her fingers along the seams. One board near the fireplace felt slightly uneven. She tapped it. Hollow. Here. A deputy fetched tools. Within minutes, the board was pried up. Beneath it, a small waterproof case. Untouched. Alina exhaled slowly. They didn't find it. Mercer took the case carefully and opened it. Inside lay a compact external hard drive. And a folded envelope. Alina unfolded the paper. It was Mara Ellison's handwriting. If anything happens to me, this goes public. The words made the room feel colder. Mercer looked at Alina. We don't plug this in here. She nodded. They transported the drive directly to the county forensic lab under armed escort. By noon, the contents were loading onto a secure system. The first folder was labeled Zoning Adjustments. Inside were scanned permits, emails, financial statements. The second folder, Land Acquisitions, Property After Property, Foreclosures, Rezoning Approvals, Purchases by Shell Corporations, all tied to one development group, Evercrest Holdings. Alina leaned closer to the screen. Who owns Evercrest? The analyst typed rapidly. It's led through 3 LLCs. Final ownership traces back to a parent company in Delaware. Name? The analyst swallowed. Northstar Infrastructure Group. Alina felt something click in her memory. She had seen that name before. Years ago. A federal corruption case. Bribery allegations. Disappeared witnesses. The charges had been dropped for lack of evidence. Mercer folded his arms. So Blackridge was next. They opened another folder. Emails between town council members and representatives from Evercrest. Negotiations. Payments. Veiled threats. One message stood out. From Councilman Richard Phelps. We can ensure the rezoning vote passes. But the Ellison property is a problem. She's been digging. Attached was a follow-up message. Handled. Dated the day after Mara Ellison's murder. The room went silent. Phelps, Mercer said slowly. He was at every press conference. He was also the loudest voice demanding justice, Alina added. Another folder loaded. Audio files. Alina clicked one. Thomas Hale's voice filled the room. They approached me after Mara started asking questions. Said if I didn't convince her to stop, they'd make an example out of someone close to me. The recording crackled. I thought if I scared her, if I made it look like a random break-in, she'd back off. Alina closed her eyes. But she didn't. She kept digging. And they said next time it wouldn't be a warning. The audio ended. Mercer looked grim. He confessed. Yes, Alina said. But he also documented coercion. The final folder was labeled Insurance. Inside were documents detailing massive insurance policies taken out on specific properties, including Mara Ellison's home. Policies that would pay out if the properties were destroyed. Destroyed? Mercer repeated. Alina scrolled further. Development plans. Luxury resort. Commercial complex. Highway expansion. Blackridge wasn't just being rezoned. It was being erased. A knock sounded at the lab door. A deputy stepped in, pale. "Sheriff, you need to see this." They followed him to the station's main office. Television screens were broadcasting breaking news. A press conference. Councilman Richard Phelps stood at a podium. Behind him were two men in dark suits. The same suits from the Ridge. "Last night's tragic incident at Blackridge Lookout," Phelps said solemnly, "appears to have been the result of a deranged individual acting alone." Alina's fists clenched. "Thomas Hale was a disturbed man," Phelps continued. "He murdered Mara Ellison and kidnapped Caleb Doyle. Law enforcement heroically intervened, preventing further tragedy." Mercer muttered under his breath. "They're burying it already." One of the suited men stepped forward. "We have full confidence in the ongoing investigation," he said smoothly. Alina recognized him instantly. He had been the one shouting up at Hale from below the tower. She turned to the analyst. "Zoom in." The camera focused. Facial recognition software ran quietly in the background. Match found. The name appeared on screen. Victor Langford, Senior Vice President, North Star Infrastructure Group. Alina felt the weight of it. This wasn't just a corrupt councilman. It was corporate infiltration, strategic acquisition, silencing opposition. Mercer looked at her. "We go public now. They'll crush us." "If we wait," she replied, "they'll erase the rest." As if summoned by her words, the station lights flickered. The analyst frowned at his monitor. "Ah, Sheriff. What is it?" "The system's being accessed remotely." "How?" "I don't know. It's like someone's mirroring our server." Alina's stomach dropped. "They're trying to wipe it." "Pull the drive," Mercer ordered. The analyst yanked the external drive free. But on screen, files were disappearing. Corrupting. Encrypted. "Ergap it," Alina snapped. They disconnected the network cable. The flickering stopped. Silence settled. The analyst checked the folders. "Some files are gone," he said quietly. "But not all." "How much did we lose?" "About 20%. Alina exhaled slowly. "Enough remains." Mercer looked toward the television. Phelps was finishing his statement. "We will not allow fear to divide our community." Alina stepped closer to the screen. "You already have," she whispered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. She answered. A calm voice spoke. "You're persistent, detective." "Victor Langford." Alina didn't reply immediately. "You should know," he continued, "that this can still be handled quietly." "Handled," she said coldly. "Blackridge deserves progress. Investment. Jobs. Not blood." A pause. "You're idealistic. That's admirable." Alina's grip tightened around the phone. "Threatening my witnesses and murdering people isn't progress. You can't prove that. We have Hale's recording. Circumstantial. We have emails. Misinterpreted. We have financial trails. Legal." His voice remained disturbingly calm. "You're standing in a small county station," Langford said softly. "Do you really think you can take on North Star?" Alina glanced at Mercer. He met her gaze. "Steady. We don't have to," she replied. "Oh." She looked at the camera lens broadcasting the press conference live. "We just have to show everyone." There was silence on the line. Then, "You won't make it to that step." The call ended. Alina lowered the phone slowly. Mercer didn't need to ask. "They're escalating," he said. She nodded. "Then so do we." Outside, sirens wailed suddenly. Deputies rushed toward the windows. Smoke rose from the far end of town. "Where's that?" Mercer demanded. A dispatcher shouted from her desk. "Caleb Doyle's house." Alina's blood ran cold. "They're cleaning up loose ends." Mercer grabbed his jacket. "Move." As they rushed out of the station, Alina felt a sharp clarity settle over her. This was no longer about solving a murder. It was about stopping a machine. A machine that devoured land, silenced dissent, and rewrote truth in real time. And it had just declared war. The convoy sped toward the smoke. Behind them, in the station's darkened lab, the external drive sat on the desk. Files partially corrupted, but not destroyed. Hidden among them was one folder untouched by the attempted wipe. A folder labeled, Federal contacts. Inside it, an unsent email draft from Mara Ellison, addressed to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and attached, everything. Flames tore through Caleb Doyle's house by the time Sheriff Mercer's convoy reached the street. Neighbors stood outside in shock, rainwater still pooling in gutters from the previous night's storm. Smoke poured from shattered windows, thick and black, swallowing the roofline. Firefighters were already battling the blaze. Anyone inside? Alina shouted as she jumped out of the vehicle. A firefighter shook his head. House was empty. Looks like it started in the back office. Alina and Mercer exchanged a look. The office, where Caleb kept his research backups. They're not even pretending anymore, Mercer muttered. Alina scanned the street. 2 unfamiliar black SUVs idled briefly at the far intersection, then turned and disappeared. Back at the station, tension coiled in every corner of the building. Deputies checked doors. Windows were locked. Communications were being rerouted through secured lines. Caleb Doyle lay in a hospital bed under guard, bruised but conscious. Alina stood beside him as he stared at the television mounted in the corner of the room. Councilman Richard Phelps was speaking again. The tragic fire at Mr. Doyle's residence appears to be unrelated to prior events, Phelps said solemnly. Caleb let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Unrelated, he whispered. Alina leaned closer. You're safe here. He looked at her. No one's safe. She didn't argue. Instead, she said, Mara's drive survived. His eyes sharpened. How much? Enough. He closed his eyes briefly. Then we don't wait. Sheriff Mercer paced his office. We go to the state attorney general. They'll slow walk it, Alina replied. Or tip someone off. The governor. Too political. Mercer stopped pacing. The feds. Alina nodded. They already knew, she said quietly. Mara Ellison had drafted that email to the U.S. Attorney's Office before she died, which meant she had believed someone there would listen. The question was, who could they trust? The external drive sat on the desk between them. One folder remained untouched by the attempted wipe. Federal contacts. Inside was not just the unsent email. There were names. Specific prosecutors. Agents. One name was highlighted in Mara's notes. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Roth. Annotation, clean. No ties to North Star. Mercer studied the name. Why him? Alina scrolled further. Mara had attached articles. Years ago, Roth had attempted to prosecute a subsidiary of North Star Infrastructure Group for bribery tied to highway contracts. The case had collapsed when 2 witnesses recanted. Roth had publicly criticized the dismissal. He had been reassigned shortly after. He has history with them, Alina said. And motive, Mercer added. They looked at each other. It was a gamble. But everything was. That evening, Alina made the call from a secured satellite line routed outside county networks. The line rang twice. A measured voice answered. Roth. She didn't waste time. My name is Detective Alina Cruz. I'm calling from Blackridge County. We have evidence connecting local officials and executives from North Star Infrastructure to homicide, coercion, insurance fraud, and land acquisition conspiracy. Silence. Then, I'm listening. 2 days later, an unmarked federal vehicle rolled into Blackridge. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Roth stepped out. He looked tired, but focused. Alina met him outside the station. You came fast, she said. I've been waiting for a reason, he replied. Inside the evidence room, Mercer laid everything out. Emails, financial trails, audio confession from Thomas Hale, insurance documents, photographs from the ridge, video footage from the press conference clearly showing Victor Langford of North Star Infrastructure Group present at the explosion site. Roth studied it methodically. You understand, he said finally, that once this moves forward, there's no stepping back. Mercer nodded. We passed that point when they shot a man off a tower. Roth's expression darkened slightly. Do you have proof he was shot? Alina handed him a forensics report. Metal fragment recovered from Hale's remains. Ballistics matched to a high-caliber rifle. Not Hale's weapon. Roth exhaled slowly. This isn't just corruption, he said. It's organized criminal enterprise. He closed the folder. I'll file for federal indictments. Alina felt something shift in the room. Momentum. For the first time since Mara Allison's body had been discovered. They weren't reacting. They were advancing. But North Star was not finished. The night before the indictment paperwork was to be finalized, power across 3 blocks of Blackridge suddenly failed. The station's backup generator kicked in. Mercer grabbed his radio. Report. Substation overload, a deputy replied. Utility company says it's mechanical. Alina didn't believe it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. She answered. Victor Langford's voice drifted through calmly. You're making a mistake. It's too late, she replied. You think indictments stick? He asked mildly. You think juries understand complex development structures? We create opportunity. You create chaos. You create graves. A faint sigh. You could still walk away. Transfer departments. Let someone else handle the paperwork. Alina stepped toward the window. Outside, the town sat in darkness. Except headlights. Multiple vehicles gathering at the far end of the street. She felt her pulse spike. You really don't understand, Langford continued. We don't lose. A crash echoed downstairs. Shouting. Mercer's voice backed orders. Alina's grip tightened on the phone. You just did. She hung up. Gunfire erupted below. Not sustained. Warning shots. Alina ran downstairs. 3 masked men had attempted to breach the rear entrance. They fled when deputies returned fire. Within minutes, sirens wailed across town. The attackers vanished into the night. Roth stood in the hallway, pale but steady. That's obstruction, he said quietly. An attempted assault on federal officers. Mercer nodded grimly. They are panicking. Roth pulled out his phone. I'm accelerating this. By sunrise, federal agents arrived. Arrest warrants in hand. Simultaneous operations executed in 3 states. Councilman Richard Phelps was taken into custody outside his home. Victor Langford was arrested at a private airfield attempting to board a jet. Executives tied to shell corporations were detained. Financial accounts were frozen. Servers seized. News networks lit up with the story. Headlines flashed across screens nationwide. Federal corruption ring exposed in small-town land scheme. Alina stood in the station lobby, watching as footage showed Langford being led in handcuffs past cameras. For the first time, he didn't look calm. He looked small. Weeks later, the indictments expanded. Racketeering, conspiracy, witness intimidation, murder. Thomas Hale's role was publicly reframed. A coerced accomplice, not mastermind. Mara Allison was acknowledged as the whistleblower who had tried to stop it. Caleb Doyle's investigative work was credited with preserving the final evidence. Blackridge's development plans were suspended indefinitely. The land seizures were reversed pending review. Families who had nearly lost their homes were granted protection. One afternoon, Alina visited the ridge. The fire lookout tower was gone. Only charred beams remained. Wind swept across the cliff, carrying the scent of pine. Mercer joined her. Feels quieter, he said. For now. He nodded. You did good, Cruz. She stared out at the horizon. We did what was necessary. Below them, the town looked unchanged. But it wasn't. Truth had cracked something open. And once exposed, it couldn't be buried again. Alina thought about Mara Allison drafting that unsent email. About Thomas Hale's desperate choice. About Caleb risking everything. None of them had wanted to be heroes. They had simply refused to look away. Mercer broke the silence. What happens next? Alina watched clouds drift slowly across the sky. Now, she said, we rebuild. Behind them, at the base of the ridge, construction crews were already dismantling what remained of the ruined tower. Not to erase it, but to replace it. A new lookout would be built. Stronger, visible, a reminder. As Alina turned to leave, her phone buzzed. This time, a secure federal line. Roth's voice came through. Charges are holding, he said. But this isn't the only town they targeted. She wasn't surprised. Send the files, she replied. A pause. You sure? Alina glanced back once more at Blackridge, at the place where truth had almost been silenced. Yes, she said firmly, because corruption didn't disappear when one ring collapsed. It adapted. It moved. and someone had to keep chasing it. It was a beginning, and Detective Alina Cruz was already moving toward the next storm.